Ben, Gabby, thanks for jumping on today. Certainly appreciate each one of you.
Happy to come back.
Great to be here, Cable. Thanks.
Yeah. So Ben, usually you're coming on the show and you're wearing a tie. You're in your office in DC. You're in the backyard bar today.
I am.
Yeah, you gave us a little virtual tour. It's nice, man. The weather must be nice in DC.
It is. It's
nice.
sunny, breezy, right, Gabby? Yeah, it's not bad.
Mm-hmm.
The federal holiday, so the city's all shut down. So I figured, why not zoom in from my backyard, my happy place.
It's like 96 degrees here, so screw that. Yeah, we'll stay in the AC. So how's your summer going, Ben?
Great. Yeah, everything's been really good so far. It's been fast and furious. It's going by really quickly. Feel like our team has been all over the country and all over the world. Tracking a lot of different threats that are going on. I know we're going to talk some about what's happening here in the States. There's a lot of craziness going on over in Europe too right now and throughout the globe. But a lot of good work's being done too. I'd say I got to give credit to our partners at FACE, the European Hunting Federation. They did a first-time effort where they had a petition signed supporting hunting, emphasizing the role that we play as hunters in conservation, because that's been a big issue being voted on, is biodiversity and how they're going to, how they're going to manage their land and their wildlife in the years to come. And over there in Europe, like petitions, they're more than just, your change.org petitions that just show a bunch of people feel a certain way. They actually have teeth to them, and they require response from the commission and from parliament. They have a whole committee that's set up called PETI, P-E-T-I. It's all about petitions. So this one was awesome because it's off the bat, just got their attention. As soon as the signature started getting on there, the commission started asking for more facts, backing everything up, showing the science, showing how hunting is making the difference, how it benefits livelihoods, how animals thrive in places where hunting takes place. And it came down to the wire. They had a vote last week. And we won. It was a very narrow margin, but there was the whole docket that was put in place, triggered by this petition, that gave hunters a big win and just reinforced that we have a very important seat at the table. So that was really, really cool. And that just happened in the last week.
So which countries are the biggest players in that?
In Europe?
Yeah. The FACE, what you're talking about in this petition.
Yeah. So FACE, they're unique. They're members. We're associate members. So we go to their meetings and attend and give support where we can, work really closely together. But their membership are all the different hunting federations. I think that the biggest, strongest are going to be the ones that are in the European Union. That's one big block. It plays a big role on, CITES and different international treaties that determine how wildlife moves across countries and lines. So I think that they're the biggest block. And then you just look at like where those traditions are the strongest and oldest. I mean, Germany, Italy, France. France is huge. In France, to go hunting, you have to join the federation because you've got to get your hunter certification over there. That requires being a member. So there are 2 million members there in France that are in their hunting federation. And I mean, they've got a monster budget. Like they run national TV ads, showing like how hunters make a positive impact. They'll show like a nasty collision with the deer and then the hunter going in and, cleaning it up, or the hunter going out hunting to prevent that from happening, like the rewind, which is cool. I mean, they're just playing on a different level and it's amped up over there. I mean, obviously you see it across the board, Cable and Gabby, just how antis are. They're nasty. They come after people. They try to threaten. I mean, over there, it's like on another level though. It's crazy charge over there.
I'm watching this TV show right now. It's about this. I think it's a Wyoming game warden, Joe Pickett. Have you heard of it? It's a book, but it's also it's on Paramount Plus, and like this is season 2, and I guess the bad guy protagonist in this one is an anti-hunting, like social media presence guy who's like going to schools and teaching kids that like hunting is bad, and if your parents are hunters, they're so it's very interesting, just to it doesn't really seem like it's far from reality,
Sure, right.
People like and teachers who are telling kids right now today starting in elementary school and then certainly by the university level. I mean, so few young people who pursue a degree in wildlife management actually hunt anymore. Whereas, 30, 40 years ago, it was 80%, 90%. Yeah. So, Gabby, I saw you just got back from Poma.
Yes, in Oklahoma. And I was actually hanging out with Ben's associate from Virginia as well, Chris LaSavita. He was on my panel about digital media. So that was a lot of fun. We had a good kind of smaller event, but next year we're going to South Carolina. So if you guys are interested, your listeners are interested getting involved in Poma, we're going to be having some interesting changes, positive changes, and want to welcome everyone, budding communicators. They could be influencers, writers.
What is Poma?
What have you?
Just for folks that
Outdoor Media Association, of which I'm a board member. I'm secretary.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
So y'all had a good conference going to South Carolina next year. Okay. Well, let's not waste any time today. I want to get into the BLM, the largest public landowner entity in the country, and they recently published a proposed rule on conservation and landscape health. Before we dissect that proposal, though, Ben, what is the BLM's function at its core, and how pertaining to hunting and conservation?
Yeah, well, sure. Obviously, like BLM, Bureau of Land Management, falls under the Department of the Interior. Like you said, it's the biggest chunk of land. It's mostly out west. Anyone who lives out west that I'm explaining this to right now is like, yeah, we already know. Fast forward.
Right.
But in the east, we don't really have many parcels. I mean, there's like little nuggets like down in
Florida. Here. Yeah.
Yeah, Texas for sure not. I mean, public land's tough in general in Texas outside of Big Bend. But I mean, BLM at its core is multi-use. It has a multi-use mandate, right? So it's longest term use of the land possible, because we have people that are, they make their livelihoods off of BLM land, whether it's, grazing, the mineral rights that exist on BLM land. I mean, it's enormous. And the hunting opportunities out there are incredible, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when I worked at Interior, I would ask like some of the staff at the BLM, I was like, how much of BLM land is open to hunting? And they just look at me like it was a silly question, like, well, all of it, it's multiple use, but how much of it is actually open to hunting? Like, no, all of it, okay. Like shooting ranges, right? You have the public shooting ranges. They're all over out west on BLM and used to that advantage. So it's really critical land, managed by the feds. That can get a little sticky out west a lot of times. Lots of really great people working at BLM, especially the folks that are on the ground out west. I mean, it's uniquely American, right?
Oh yeah. So I would assume that would make it the biggest, probably the biggest land managing entity in the world. Thinking about the hundreds of millions of acres. Europe doesn't have this. It's all privatized hunting.
Yeah.
It's got to be. Canada probably has quite a bit of. I know they have a lot of public land, but their government leases that usually to, hey, X outfitter, here's your your square mileage that you lease, that you pay. Same thing. They're leasing it.
So put in perspective, I don't have the exact numbers. We look it up later. I mean, like the state of Utah is like 70%, like public land, right? And
66, yeah.
66. And then so Nevada, right, is like in the 70s.
Gabby's
right?
like an encyclopedia on this stuff.
I did a report on this last year. I went there.
Yeah.
I narrated, remember factoids,
Well, so it's the wording in this proposal that has all of us collectively raising our eyebrows, and other pro-hunting organizations kind of doing the same thing. And Gabby, you've been, you've sent me links to stuff. Did you see this? Did you see? Of course, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers and the Teddy Roosevelt Conservation Partnership are the first ones that are applauding. Yay, yay, yay. I don't understand. So I've started looking at it. I'm like, wait, the wording is very concerning because of this. What they're trying to do is allow for the leasing of BLM land for conservation. But while we're doing that, we're gonna rewrite conservation and turn it into preservation. Gabby, what's the difference between conservation and preservation?
It's pretty easy to dissect the differences, and then we can go into kind of if this is a new thing or if conservation is already implied in federal law, which it is. But conservation, as we all know, and your listeners know, is the wise use of natural resources. That also includes recreational opportunities, accessing public lands. And preservation, which is good, and I would say small amounts. We like national parks. There's a need for it in certain areas of the country, absolutely. And actually 40% of all federal lands, those managed by the federal government, are already off limits to multiple uses. People don't know that, but the Geological Service has said that as well. But preservation is essentially viewed as no human input, no human access, leave everything to nature. And an extreme view of that would be rewilding efforts, which is what all of us have documented for hunting efforts, 30 by 30 and all these other policies. And even this BLM rule could fit into that as well. It could be used perhaps for 30 by 30, creating more non-uses to then create Antiquities Act designations, which would create national monuments, which should allow hunting and fishing, but oftentimes they don't because they don't recognize the contributions of state wildlife management agencies. But a FLIPMA, which is the law that governs public lands, as Ben was alluding to with BLM and their multiple use mandate, conservation uses are already implied. Are they enforced? Hardly in many cases. So as Ben was saying, the multiple use model, which does recognize recreational opportunities as well, would potentially be threatened if this rule were to be adopted. However, if you read the fact sheet, they try to placate concerns and say, we're not going to change the model. You don't have to fear this. But embedded in the rule, they say, and this is more, and I can probably speak more freely to this because I cover energy as well, Ben. And you remember this from your time in Interior, of course, too. But something that stuck out to me, and if you're a conservationist, you want the best use of land, they say that in line with this conservation use, you could have carbon offsets and you could have these clean energy projects proceed as long as they're promising to mitigate the impact of these projects through carbon offsets or promising to create wildlife habitat, destroying high habitat for creating low quality habitat in turn, without accounting for what the projects may do environmentally and ecologically. There are many, many concerns. I've documented this very extensively with certain clean energy projects, wind and solar, wind in particular out west. A lot of people are very concerned about its impacts on wildlife corridors, what it'll do to underwater aquifer sources, things of that sort. And sometimes the damage from those projects can be tenfold of what oil, coal, and gas, and even nuclear does. And so when I see some of kind of the inconsistencies with what are we going to be using BLM land for? We want clean energy, but there's no need to look into it. Or we're going to destroy high quality habitat with deforestation and substitute it and promote low quality habitat just by buying carbon offsets. That doesn't sit well with me. And then the whole lease component, which I think Ben can speak to it more as well. But it creates a system where very wealthy preservationist groups, our friends who don't like hunting, more specifically, are going to use the monies that they have at their disposal, millions of dollars, maybe even billions, to bid on these leases, outbid grazers, mining leases, individuals, outfitters, anyone who they say is going to be open to this process. They're certainly going to have more weight and likely be given these leases because they can bid more money. It's going to create an unfair system. And then it's also going to create kind of a thing we shrug against, the privatization of public lands. And it's going to create that system where—
why would BHA be applauding it? That doesn't make any sense to me. Like, based off of what you just said, BHA, backcountry hunters and anglers, all about public land opportunity and access. Why are they applauding something that is a potential threat to the very vein of their existence?
I mean, I'll speak to SCI. We saw the proposed rule come out and reviewed it. And obviously it's trying to put, on face, it's putting conservation at equal footing with other uses, right? That's how it's couched. That's what the fact sheet is. And we're conservationists. That's central to our mission, right?
Right.
Protect the freedom to hunt and wildlife conservation worldwide. Like, okay. So if I'm seeing something that has to do with conservation, I want to be able to celebrate it, right?
Right.
But if I'm reading over this thing and then I'm getting more and more questions and I am answers out of reading over it, and I start to just have my mind drift towards, is this, a solution in search of a problem? Like, what is it? Like, what tools do they not currently have to be able to do what they say they want to do? Why does there have to be a whole new reworking of it with the rule? Well,
is the system broken?
Where was the opportunity to ask these questions before this came out in the Federal Register, right?
Right.
So that's when it's just like, no, I don't support this. I oppose this, and we're going to thoughtfully go through all these issues and hopefully have a conversation, see this thing tossed, put aside, and then reworked. where
Right.
it actually has stakeholder input. And
Like
that's
the
not,
worst thing ever
yeah,
would
I mean,
be if
that's across the board.
if like defenders for wildlife or what is it?
NRDC,
Yeah, or
CBD.
PETA or Humane Society. Oh, Center for Biological Diversity, one of the worst. If they got their hands on these lands, it would effectively just be shut down to everything.
Sure.
Like okay, of course. So no use. The land is just sitting there, being utilized for essentially nothing. Nobody's benefiting, and that's their goal. Shut it down.
Yep.
Yeah.
It ends up it reads to me like BLM wanting to be a park service, right? Like that's its aspiration right there, like on paper. That's just how it looks. So I just want to get clarity on how you're not going to damage and affect, what the multi-use mandate is. Can we not get to the solution we're all after without this sort of proposed rule? And
is the system broken as is? Like did it need tweaking to this level?
I mean,
in your opinion,
every bit of land is fought over, right? Yeah. And there's different opinions on how it should be used. I think that this shows colors of the current administration on how they want to see it used.
Yeah. Well, I mean, an SCI was right there on the forefront when Deb Haaland was, nominated by Biden, saying, "Hey, will you support a no net loss hunting ideology?" And she was like, she just wouldn't do it. And we have lost. We've lost millions of acres in Alaska, and now we're losing.
She didn't commit to it, and neither did any other political appointee that we asked. That we didn't only ask her; we asked everyone else that had some sort of stake in managing our public lands. Can you commit to the simplest, lowest bar possible for hunters?
Yeah.
No net loss of access. Not asking for more. Just don't take it away. Can you commit to it? No. And now we see the shoe drop, and the shoe drops in many ways. Like you said, Alaska, millions of acres shut down. You look at lead phase outs, that's economic access, shutting it down. I mean, big win last week, with Fish and Wildlife Service denying CBD, our best friend that we just talked about, denying their petition to have a national phase out. Like, thank goodness. Yeah. But now I just get concerned, like, okay, you're not going to give it to them this way. Are you just going to start phasing out, one by one, the way you were doing in the last hunt fish rule? And we'll see the next hunt fish rule hopefully this week. I know that it's like in the whole signature process. It should be all wrapped up, but I'm not excited to see what's in it. I know that we're going to fight it tooth and nail, though.
Yeah. Well, and through my, I guess, battle with Texans from Outlines here in Texas, I've spoken out against these organizations for my entire career. That was the first time where I was like on the front line in my own state, taking them head on, going to the Capitol and speaking, or the Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission meetings. And the thing I walked away from that realizing was how well organized and how well funded our opposition is. And that's why this is scary. Like Gabby said, well, if they could pony up tens of millions of dollars for each lease because they've duped these people and with their emotional pleas for funding, save the wildlife, okay, well, hunters are already doing that, but no, that's not what their messaging is. Then, that's a major threat.
Yep. And we've seen it happen. I mean, it's a shared playbook internationally. I mean, in Canada, we've seen it happen with hunting leases, bought up by anti-hunting groups, animal rights groups, where they just lock it down and don't use the land for what it's supposed to be used for. This is just possibly a different way to do it here in the United States.
Gabby, when the term green decoy came out, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, what did you think of it then, and what do you think of it now when it comes to people or groups within our ranks that maybe don't have our best interests at heart? Do you think there's legitimacy to that?
I think it's been vindicated for those who were actively using it. And I know we all have friends in some of these organizations, and we have to be careful, about how we go about the terminology, directly criticizing them. I operate more behind the scenes when I'm looking into this, but there is some validity to it, especially if they're aiding and abetting these groups and then putting out public lands platitudes. It seems like cognitive dissonance, and then you don't see these groups, it's manyfold, coming out to protect and defend various forms of hunting because they see, well, I don't like shooting with this type of weapon, or this type of hunting is really like uncanny or it's very bad and I don't like this, it's cruel and unusual, but I like other forms of hunting. They're not thinking big picture. They're not thinking what is at stake. And I think a lot of people think kind of in a short-term manner. They don't kind of view big picture, and that's always a problem in politics. And sometimes, groups that have good intentions, perhaps, they have very kind of short-sighted view into this. And even procedurally, in terms of implementation, Ben, I think you've heard Senator Barrasso and others have said this. I don't think the rule can actually be adopted. It may be in violation of the Congressional Review Act because it mimics a lot of a previous rule from 2016 that was undone in 2017. Almost word for word, you see similar language, platitudes. It just has a slightly new name, but it's a similar conservation rule to put so-called conservation uses on equal footing with other multiple uses. So this rule was already deliberated. The Congress, when the new administration came in, decided to revoke it because there were many, many concerns with it. Most Republicans, and I think even a handful of Democrats, said we can in good conscience support this. So they had the full vote between the House and the Senate, went to President Trump's desk, and he basically signed it into law saying this rule can't proceed. And under that stipulation, you can't repeat the same rule. Only Congress can define what conservation is because of FLIPMA. FLIPMA is what, like I said, guides, and I forget the exact full wording of it, but FLIPMA, easily Googleable, the Federal Land Policy and Management Act. There we go. FLIPMA, that's what it's called for short. It already guides what is conservation. You'd have to change that law to see so-called conservation leases adopted. So a lot of people may actually oppose this on legal grounds and procedural grounds because the rule has already been tried and you can't duplicate it. So actually it may fall into this kind of no-go zone, kind of bad territory of not being able to go into enactment because of these rules. So maybe some rules and separation of powers will help us here, and perhaps lawsuits when the final rule is put out, and it's perhaps forecasted to be our worst fears, to redefine what multiple uses, to redefine what conservation is. So the judicial branch, I think, and also lawsuits will help us if it's what we believe our worst fears are.
Okay. Well, yeah, and you mentioned Senator Barrasso from Wyoming. He actually was awarded by SCI as what was he the I don't know the term but it was a high honor.
He's a past federal legislator of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
he's the man.
And so he drafted or proposed a bill, kind of what you were just saying, Gabby. I don't know what the bill number was, but his response to this was very proactive.
Yeah, he was the first to say, I will work to defeat this and repeal this. And he was the one who wrote the statement saying that this was not legal because of precedents from Congress. And we've seen this with many directives relating to our issues. Regulatory agencies are exceeding their bounds where it falls in the court of Congress to do this. So they're creating rules, much like with recreational fishing, as they are trying to do in hunting, exceeding their bounds. And so in this argument, we could even say that BLM is exceeding their grounds, trying to act like Congress, creating new policy when they are supposed to be limited in what they can do in terms of that. So I want to be, looking half full with respect to this, because I know challenges to this will be there. And I have a feeling some moderate Democrats will say, like they have with WOTUS and some other rules that have been handed out, they believe that probably their constituents were not consulted. So you'll see maybe Tester, maybe Manchin, maybe a handful of others from Arizona saying, whoa, what's going on with this rule? Like, our people were not consulted. We need more discretion. And so I kind of see it like going where other environmental or conservation pieces have gone. I want to look at it like that and think that'll be the case, but that doesn't mean you dismiss the potential worst case scenario that Ben and I have been talking about, because we've worked in policy long enough to see that what is coming out from Washington, unfortunately, doesn't look to be positive for sportsmen and women, even though they're saying that this is great. We have the best interests of sportsmen at hand, but it seems like they're directly being petitioned by these preservationist groups, totally obfuscating the stakeholder process. And I hear from local people on the ground who say, sure, we'll get a visit from Secretary Haaland. And we've talked to some people from DC. The local people, like Ben said, are great, and they don't always agree with what happens in Washington from their agency. So there is a bit of a difference sometimes with what is playing out locally versus what is happening from Washington in terms of directives. But yes, the future of conservation stakeholder relations, I think, is at jeopardy here, especially if this rule proceeds, because then it's going to totally upend the model and make it harder for hunters and anglers to have a say, even though monetarily we do contribute a huge bulk
that's
of
the
funding.
huge thing right there. And I'm glad you brought it up, because I was like thinking in my head, well, yeah, you put restrictions on these massive swaths of public land, you take away opportunity, and then you've just, neutered the entire funding mechanism of, license tags, even, a $10 or $15 access permit or whatever it is, all of that just wasted, and then there's no funding.
I always just say, used land is loved land, right? Like, how are you going to have a connection to the land if you never get to use it, right? In some way. So you want to block it off and lock it out and not have people touching it? No one's going to have any investment in it. Let's see where that goes.
Yeah. I don't think that's the way God intended it. Like there's too much beauty out there to see and experience. What about and as we're wrapping up, I think we've covered what I wanted to talk about on this topic, but the Biden administration's kind of found themselves in hot water with the Navajo Nation in New Mexico, because they're trying to tell these people that, hey, you can't potentially drill on your land, because we're going to prevent you from doing that in the name of saving the climate or whatever BS that they're spewing is today. But what are your all's thoughts on that?
Yeah, they say they love and respect tribal input, but on certain issues, they totally dismiss their concerns. The Navajo Nation example you point to in New Mexico, not surprising to see that. They did that right after he first got into office, and he said no new oil and gas leases. And then he did make some exemptions for the Ute tribe and some others, but a lot of those tribes did not get exemptions. Their concerns were not heard. We also have seen kind of a similar disregard for input in Alaska, similarly with different energy projects and even some conservation related policy. And I even want to point back to the Antiquities Act. This happened in, where was it, Colorado, the Ute tribe. I think they're perhaps the boldest, and they're going to say more. And I think more are going to join in the chorus to say that we don't agree with this. But they were not properly consulted. And we saw a very scathing condemnation of them designating a monument in Colorado on historic Ute tribe land without their consultation. So we even see this administration alienating tribal interests, which they say they regard and they esteem, right. and these are esteemed opinions. We need to look to them. And they dismiss tribal input, especially on critical issues. Where are they on forest management? Native Americans have long said prescribed burns are necessary. And if you have no multiple uses, what's going to happen to that forest land if you can't properly maintain it? We're going to see more high intensity forest fires. Going back to, like I said, this kind of native tradition of respecting fire and using fire for good to prevent, worse fires, high intensity fires in the future. But they're even ignoring them on different issue areas, energy, conservation, and national monuments, and even preservation policy too. So it's very particular in terms of what tribes they look to or what tribal perspectives they want to seek out. And so that is a concern. And I would hope those of us in the hunting and fishing space look to work with them. I've always been wanting to work with them. I know many of them do hunting and fishing, and they feel kind of lost. Who do you lean to? Maybe they're skeptical of certain federal government interference. Perhaps, and I think in some instances, they've even had some of their hunting opportunities potentially lost, I think in Alaska and some other places too. So they have worked, with some hunting and angling interests to stop any overreach from the federal government. But Ben, do you want to chime in on that too? That's kind of my take of it.
No, I think you covered it really well, Gabby. I mean, I think it's not just isolated incident with the Navajo Nation, but like you said, goes back to day one of Biden coming into office. I think that's what you saw, the House Republicans, as soon as they took over, their first bill was on, American energy. You just have a shutdown across the board, regardless of how it's affecting American people.
Yeah.
They like to have, say nice things about how they care about people until there's an exception to the rule, right?
Well, and you saw with the Keystone Pipeline, their union endorsed Biden, and then the first thing he did was say, "We're shutting that down, boys." And then they're like, "Oh, look at all the egg on my face." Oh, well, okay, but this one was just in the news, last week. That's why I wanted to bring it up. And they did protest. I think Deb Howland was, she was attending, I guess, a celebration of telling these people that they can't, lease oil, have oil leases on their own land, and then they blocked the road access because they were pretty pissed off about it. So Yeah. Which I applaud. You know, I think Americans are tired of being told what we can and can't do across the board. More rules or rules for thee, but not for me. That mindset. So,
Yeah, it's
well,
interesting.
anyway,
Just, on that too with Navajo Nation. You know, we were at CITES in Panama last year in the late fall, and the head of their DNR for Navajos was there. You know, because a big topic and point of discussion was indigenous peoples and local communities. So she was, you know, there for that discussion. It's interesting. It just sounded like I was listening to somebody facing the same issues in Africa. You know, and the great work that they do to be able to manage wildlife and have healthy populations.
Yeah. Well, and having just gotten back from South Africa, man, it always reaffirms that, you know, what we're doing here works. And when we give other countries the playbook and they adopt it, then we can't just, you know, a decade later be like, actually, that doesn't work for us anymore.
Right.
Well, why? We have more lions and more rhinos and more giraffe than we did. Yeah. But it makes us feel bad when you guys shoot them or let someone hunt them. So anyway, yeah, it's modern day colonialism. I hate it, but we'll keep fighting it. Thanks for everything that you guys do, Gabby. District of Conservation podcast, obviously Ben, SCI, our longtime title sponsor, and appreciate everything you guys do. And just to reiterate, SCI is certainly proactive around the globe, but you guys do just as much work here in North America, day in and day out, as any conservation organization. So, and I think it's what, $65 to join for the year to become a member.
That's it. Yep.
Yeah. So
I renewed my membership. I think double.
yeah. Yep.
Nice. Thanks. Hopefully you took advantage of it. Maybe you got a tacticam out of it. You know,
I don't think I got anything out of it, but I'm happy to support it.
Yeah, no, thank you for that.
SafariClub.org. Y'all check it out. Thank you guys both very much. And we'll do this again soon.
Thank you, Cable, for having us.
Take
Thanks
care.
so much.